then Chris in support. So what we'll do with this item, if you can just refrain from commenting or questioning until the end of Hamish's presentation, that will be fantastic. Oh, over to you, Hamish.
All right, Morena everyone. So hopefully most of you know who I am. I've done a couple of presentations now, so Works Group Manager. So really this is just sort of an annual update, just to look over a bit of financial, where we ended up with the financials year ending 30th of June, and a little bit of health and safety update, some environmental stuff that we're looking at, and then just sort of a snapshot of some projects we've been working on throughout the year. So I'll just move through. So basically that's our team. We've got 31 staff, and a little bit of turnover at the moment with staff, so that's always a challenge. Obviously our workforce is, we've got some aged guys there, or it is a bit of an aged workforce, but they're definitely, those guys are the ones with experience, and we're trying to sort of bring in those younger guys to work under them, and that's our focus when we're in the recruitment phase. A few tractors there, so that's just a few of our main tractors based in Taradale and Waipukurau. So in terms of the finances, so this year was quite a different year for obvious reasons. We had the 5-week lockdown in the middle of it, and that really affected our turnover. So we had about a sort of a $200,000 liability sitting on our books for the year, which was effectively having 30 odd staff at home, unable to work on full pay. So we obviously had them all on rostered for emergencies and for flood response, but effectively those guys were unable to carry on with too much apart from essential duties. So anyway, that's our breakdown of turnover. Effectively we split it into 3 different groups. The external work, which is about 25% of our work. I'll talk about these in more depth as we go through. Committed council projects, which is our council contract, and then uncommitted work, which is that work over and above our contracted work for council. So that makes up, obviously the committed stuff makes up the biggest proportion of our work. That's basically our contract with council. So this year, just over 3.8 million, which is down about 3.9, down about 100,000 from last year, really due to that downtime period through COVID and just effectively not having the time to get the work done. So the uncommitted work that I mentioned, sort of that work over and above the contracted work. That's just a snapshot of the bigger projects that we've done. So the Morakako Access Culvert was a job that was done for the asset management projects team out at Morakako, creating a new access for gravel extraction. So that was a reasonable sized job. And then various other jobs. We did some work up in Wairua on the Wairua River, building a small wall, which was done by QRS, the local contractor. Obviously forestry works, we do quite a bit for Ben Douglas and in the forest there, thinning, pruning, etc. And the Ahuriri estuary FICO removal was quite a big project earlier on in the year. External works, so as we've sort of talked about before, we focus on working for those non-profit organisations. So a big chunk of our work is for Napier City and Hastings District Council. So we're doing quite a lot at the moment, working on their small community water treatment plants that they're putting. There's about 6 or 7 of them throughout the region. So our drainage crews working on those projects, the civil portion of them. And then Napier City Council, we do quite a bit of drainage work plus mowing, spraying, and a big chunk of that was actually the Harding Road rock erosion control job that we did sort of mid-year, so it was quite high value. And then various private drainage works and the work for Tomato Trust that we do with their caretakers up there. We also do a bit of weed boating for our Wellington Regional Council associates down there. So yeah, it's quite a spread mix, but focusing on those local authorities. So that just shows how we performed against our budget. So we do run a pretty conservative budget. We sort of can accurately budget what our committed works will be, which is our contract with council. Generally, from year to year, that's fairly similar. So obviously, we're just over budget there in terms of our revenue. The uncommitted works is pretty hard to judge what will get thrown at us, but so there obviously we're over 4 times what we budgeted for. And then external projects is a bit similar. We don't really have a good heads up from year to year as to how much external work there'd be, so we're quite conservative with our budgeting there as well. But yeah, generally well ahead of budget, obviously, on there.
That'd be the understatement of the day.
This just shows sort of external income over the last 10 years, just as a matter of interest. It has slowly creeped up, and I guess that's because of the resource and expertise that we've got in-house, and just you know, the opportunities that have been put to us, and also just looks at the climate that we're in terms of how busy it is out there. There's a lot of contractors being stretched, and so we're kind of filling that gap with specialist work that drainage and certain contractors can't do. So there is definitely a lot of work going on, and there still is. The dip off this year, obviously, probably pretty much directly related to COVID. So yeah, just that 5 weeks of nothing happening, pretty much. That's just a breakdown of how our revenues split between our cost centres. So obviously we have our Taradale as our main depot. That's a big chunk of it, and then Waipukaro makes up 10%, and then we have the major plant cost centre, which is all our plant and machinery. Basically, that operates as a separate cost centre and includes labour, and basically we charge everything to the item of plant, and then that's billed out to the jobs. Management, pretty small overhead, in workshops as well. Those our costs sort of breakdown. So yeah, just quickly, obviously a big chunk is labour, and our plant costs associated with operating the plant machinery. Fuel there at 147,000, not forming a huge portion of it, but it is a big chunk, and obviously the type of machinery we're running is a fair bit of fuel usage. Subcontractors, we always try and sort of, you know, spend about 25% on subcontractors in any one year, so that's all about just keeping those contractors in work and making sure we're spreading the workload around. And also, you know, we can't do everything, so there's definitely requirement for some resources that we don't have, and expertise. This is just sort of to show the overtime that we've been doing and how that's tracking in the last 10 years. So those are hours of overtime. We generally find that we have staff that are really keen to do those extra hours. That, you know, they're on wage. They you know, they're paid well, but they make the good money by doing the extra hours. And if we've got the work there available, then we certainly offer it to them. And there is a lot of times where we struggle to keep up with the workload, and that's for various reasons. One of them being that you know, we have restrictions put on us for when we can and can't operate in the rivers, for example. So with the ecological management enhancement plan, that sort of allows us to only beach rake for 4 months of the year, and only spray and operate on the beaches for about 4 or 5 months of the year. So that means it squeezes it right up, what is still a big workload, so we need to do the hours to effectively get that done. So and once again it's dropped off this year due to COVID as well. So we had about 4,000 hours of unproductive time through that COVID period in total, so quite significant. Let's just quick look at our health and safety side of things. So we're site-wise accredited and once again achieved 100% in that for that accreditation. So pretty pleased to now achieve that for about the third or fourth year in a row. Just a snapshot of our recorded incidents this year. So our system allows staff to record every incident, basically ranging from obviously injuries, near misses, property damage, improvement ideas is a big one, you know, getting guys to put forward new ideas or things that they think could be improved on. So total incident recording this year of 73, which you know, obviously covers all those things and is not actual incidents as in injuries. So that's a breakdown of the recordings. Property damage being a fairly big chunk, and that's really from, you know, the type of work we're doing. Those reach mowers, etc. They're long, complicated machines to operate, and we're working around a lot of you know, infrastructure like power poles and fence posts, mailboxes, all that sort of thing, and fairly tight constraints. So those things can range from a broken post to a dented ute or anything like that. But in terms of injuries, nine injuries in total for the year, and that's just a quick breakdown of what those injuries were. So one was a burn, laceration, 2 bruising, 3 strains or sprains, and a couple of injuries, wasp stings. So the wasp stings ones are often not one wasp sting, they're 10 to 20 wasp stings. We get guys get caught up out on the river, and that's probably one of the most nasty things that we get out there, really, when they're spraying, etc. in the long grass. You can't really tell when you're running into a wasp nest. So, but reasonably pleased with that. Out of those 9, we had 3 lost time injuries. So, and that was from a back strain, effectively. So, if we track back over the last few years, last year we had about 15 days of lost time, and the year before was about 25 days. So we are tracking down and trying to focus on that sort of guys being fit and ready for work, and offering you know, exercises and sort of advice on how to do that, making sure the guys coming off mowers and sort of less physical jobs are ready to jump into a manual job. So. But it is hard. They injure themselves. They can't effectively do physical work. So training is a big part of that, keeping on top of them, which we carry on with our seasonal meetings, etc. Environmental side, so obviously working to the Environmental Code of Practice and still focusing on really trying to keep our guys in touch with what the requirements are, make sure we're leading by example and not just carrying on as we think works. So you know, we certainly would be focused on out of the contracting fraternity to be leaders in the field, and we need to try and keep that up. Some other things we're doing for improving our environmental side is using eco-friendly oils, hydraulic oils, chainsaw lube, and the mowers, etc. And the reach mowers have got eco-friendly oil as well. Purchasing Tier 4 tractors, trying to keep that emission control down. All future procurement will be based on you know, the highest tier possible. And yeah, purchasing of that sort of equipment, just trying to make sure we're getting the best technology, which is low emission and most fuel efficient. We've just purchased some fuel injected chainsaws, which are a whole lot more fuel efficient. Still are now providing some pretty advanced equipment. Obviously, keeping up with European markets and that, they need to be ahead of the 8 ball. So. quality, so we run a TQS1 total quality system, and that's just been recertified to May 22. So at this stage, that quality system works for us and is what clients like Hastings District Council are asking for. So yeah, remaining compliant there. Plant machinery, so I mentioned that. That tractor's a new tractor bought last year, Tier 4 John Deere, so we had to wait sort of 2 months to get that specific machine. There's a lot of tractors being supplied that are still only Tier 3, and yeah, to go to that Tier 4, it's sort of they do bring them in specially. So built that new weed boat last year. It's part of our capital replacement program. And just to comment there on all our utes and vehicles, as council's policy, we're trying to change over to have them all at a 5-star NCAP safety rating. So we're nearly there. We've got about 4, I think, that'll be changed over the next year. Other plant and equipment, we've just purchased this new mulching head for on our digger. So this is something that's been planned for a while, but basically in line with trying to reduce the amount of foliage that we're putting into burn heaps and burning, and a much more efficient way of dealing with overgrown foliage. So in this situation here, these are bitter willows which have growing over the stop bank and got to a point where we can't actually mow the stop bank because they're encroaching over so much. So this mulching head's worked really effectively by just moving along and mulching them from top to bottom, and effectively no man on a chainsaw and no burning. So got some big plans for that going forward. Obviously it's limited in what it can do, but for that purpose there it's been very effective. Just got a wee video there actually. Work?
Oh.
No volume.
Incredible, eh? Yeah, amazing.
Oh.
We can imagine it's probably pretty noisy.
Yeah.
That is a
Sound
great
effects.
machine.
What kind of noise does it make? Can you just give it?
You just leave the mulch on the ground for it to decay into the soil.
Yeah, so that'll just break down.
Sure.
Yeah. So it can mulch sort of up to that size.
Is that right?
We're hoping. And the idea is with the larger spindly willows that you see in the background there, they've all got to a point where they're actually becoming kind of ineffective as edge protection. They're getting too long and spindly. So the idea will be to go through and chop them off sort of halfway up and then mulch it down to like the height of the roof ceiling type tree, and then that'll grow stronger root system and effectively be a better tree, and then just mulching material on the ground. So yeah, certainly can't mulch what they do in those big chippers that we're seeing used now, but I think it's going to be a good way forward anyway.
Good for an unruly fence, hedge.
Yep.
Once every 5 years do the hedge.
Right, so just some key challenges for us. Obviously weed management. That left photo there's in the just at the bottom end of the Karamu running into the Clive there at Hardware Park. We trialled that weed net a couple of years ago and tried to catch the weed to stop it going down the Clive. Effectively it did work. It obviously held all the weed back, but it was a massive job to remove it and a very expensive job to take away and put into a position where it's not offensive to anyone. So it was a bit of a trial, and council's still sort of deciding how they manage that and whether.
So yeah, look, it's worth pointing out in the LTP discussion we're requesting some additional money to solve these sorts of problems. So it's not an easy problem to solve, removing all that material and leaving all the eels and other critters in the river. So that's something we'll be, again, potentially talking to council about at the next workshop.
Yeah, and on the right there, the bottom right is showing, obviously with our removal of weed from excavating waterways now, the requirement is to try and rescue as many fish as we can, and it shows a couple of staff basically pulling out little eels out of the pile of weed to try and recover them and put them back into the waterway. So that's been a huge focus in recent excavation work and will be ongoing. So we've now got a code of practice set up that staff work to make sure we're making every effort to recover mainly eels and yeah, just making sure we're saving certainly those breeding eels. So that's an ongoing focus. The top right photo is just showing a typical waterway that's out in the Pukitap area. That water celery, or cow cress as we call it, is extremely aggressive, and just trying to keep on top of that with certain chemicals. Glyphosate won't kill it, so we have to use metsulfurin, which is approved to use by EPA. So trying to keep on top of that.
Riparian planting would do that?
With that particular weed, I very much doubt it. It's
Even shading doesn't work?
no, extremely aggressive. It actually just climbs the banks and ends up outside the drain. It seems to be, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
yeah, I think it would be a big ask. So I mentioned the ecological management, so that's obviously a challenge for us, just working around the restrictions there. And also trout spawning is another one. We try and avoid those spawning areas in the smaller tributaries of the upper Tuki scheme and the upper catchments of the other river systems. So that does limit when we can operate, and yeah, but really trying to work hard to abide by that. All right, so just a snapshot here of some jobs we've been doing. So that's the culvert job. We had to divert the existing waterway to build the culvert. So the yellow dotted shows the diversion. So just wanted to point out the two top photos sort of show that's just a temporary diversion. So that's the sort of effort we've put in to make sure that we're controlling sediment. We lined the diversion with coconut matting, and then obviously the silt fences, just to make sure none of that material is coming back into the water. So then the bottom photos are showing the excavation in the dry, effectively still needing pumps to deal with the groundwater, and then building a really good sized sound foundation to take those pipe culverts. So they're a 1350 pipe, and needed a crane to put them in place with the head walls. Those head walls weigh about 10 tonnes, so it's a crane operation. And yeah, obviously the time taken to do that with a crane sort of was a whole lot quicker than using a digger. So we actually laid that whole pipeline in one day, which was quite impressive, really. That's really the finished product down there. And then now I think Russell Roads or someone's building the road into the
Yep, that's correct.
to the site. This is one of the Hastings District Council small community treatment plants. So this is out at Hamawana. So we've been doing the civil works, just the pipe work and the concrete work, building the platform for the containers. And in the background there, that's a concrete pad for a water reservoir. So HDPE pipe that's welded and put in place, and then they've got a company called Philtech coming down from Auckland, installing those containers, which are all ready to go with the water treatment
Filtration equipment and pumps and
yeah,
electrical.
Yeah, so I imagine those stations are costing them
A few $100,000 at least. Yeah.
yeah,
Depending on the size.
probably more like $1 million, I'd say, per site, and there's about 7 of them. So Waipariki, Waimarama, Clive, Eskdale, Whakatū, I think there's one. So this is Napier City Council doing a rock work along Harding Road there. That's sort of an extension of what we've done over the last 6 years, and the left photo there shows that there's nesting penguins in there, and so we had to get the old bird dog in to find the penguins, and this was working ahead of the doing the construction. So we didn't actually find any penguins, but it was certainly flagged as a nesting area. So that was part of the resource consent to do the job. Yeah, that's just showing the construction. This is a job up on the Warra River, just by the Warra Yacht Club. It was sort of done as a trial, really, using these like Flex MEC bags, which are basically a geotextile material bag filled with sand and compost, or sand and mulch, and hand placed as shown there, and then top right shows a plastic connector which locks them together, so each layer is just done in a stacking bond type structure. And the idea of them is that they provide a bit of flexibility, you know, with movement, etc. And obviously you can shape them to the ground profile. And at this stage it seems to work quite well. Basically it's already had a flood go over it and seems to have held up, but could be a good option, I think, going forward for any drain slumps and that sort of thing. You can sow hydroseed them, so that was ended up hydroseeded, so it'll grass over and effectively grow vegetation.
So do you lock each layer, do you?
Yeah, so every layer's got one of those plastic
Yep.
Things which locks it all together.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure, that was at the top of each layer, that's good, thank you.
And you can actually lay the bag back inwards, so it sort of locks in and the weight of the soil holds it on.
Like bricks.
Yeah, and or you also see them poking willow poles into them, that sort of thing, so grow you know, protection like that with planted protection. Yeah, so that's it really.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hamish. Any questions for Hamish?
Where to start? Just a quick one. I get a lot of comments about these huge piles of old poplar that are being stacked on each other, and they look like they're ready for burning. But I understand you actually mulching those now.
Well, no, not as of right. No, we did. We had those big piles, actually willow. Yeah, big
Oh, willow,
piles
sorry,
out
yeah.
at on State Highway 2 there, opposite Golflands. So we ended up getting the mulcher in there to deal with those.
So,
ones.
yeah, they were chipped, and I think it was about $15,000 to have them chipped. And so one of the challenges working forward is, I guess, budget around some of these solutions. So burning is obviously a lot cheaper, but we still have to have an excavator and men on site to oversee the burn, but it's a few thousand versus tens of thousands. And often they're stacked for about a year to dry out so that they actually burn really well. But part of what we need to work on going forward is the appropriate or balancing the practice and the financials. So I think the site on the Karamu there opposite Golflands was a good place to chip the material, but that would have a significant budget impact if we did that at every location. So.
Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Hamish. Like I just had, can you go back up to the health and safety days off slides?
Oh, is that not working?
Pretty
3 days was things.
3 days loss.
Is it gone flat or something? The injuries.
The slide that we've got that didn't see. Okay.
Oh,
Now
sorry.
go to the next one.
Are you looking at your report there? Eh?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it didn't. I was like, I
Yeah,
could have
so
something about
actually,
84 and 7.
I did a quick look at over it again yesterday and found that slide was incorrect. So
Oh, okay.
I've put a new one in there.
Okay, so I couldn't correlate the numbers of your 7 days.
No,
Or
there was
whatever.
actually a typo there, and I'm not sure. So
Okay.
yeah, we definitely last year had only 3 days, which are actual lost time, and yeah, unfortunately, I took out the slide that showed the.
Cool.
Yeah. Right.
Now, can you go back up a little bit to pinks? What's a pink?
Oh, sorry. So that's a.
I've been told, but I've forgotten.
It's
What's
process improvement non-conformance. So basically that system is, sorry? That system's what we use for all our recording of anything. So, and I believe
Yeah.
Kirsty, Health and Safety for the wider council is taking that on as a system overall
Right.
now for the whole council. So.
Good. Thank you for that, because the improvement idea but part of that threw me. I understand that you might fill out a form if there was an incident,
Yes, yeah.
but to have, so the more suggestions for improvements you get, the more pinks you get. So.
That's right.
So that can be,
So the 73 isn't necessarily alarming, it's a good thing in a way, it's people
Yeah.
are putting forward ideas and,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you. One last question was, if you just go back up a little bit. Oh, no, you just explained to me, I get committed works, contracted, assumed, intended, aware of.
Yeah.
Tell me about uncommitted works. Are these things that you get a phone call saying, hey, we need you to go and fix something?
Yeah, so basically, the committed works is what's in our fixed contract, which is mainly all the routine maintenance work,
Yeah.
such, mowing, spraying, beach raking, anything that's been allowed for during budgeting and
Yeah.
when they're putting the contract together.
Planned would be a way.
Planned work, yes. So uncommitted is anything that wasn't planned and wasn't, I guess, in the contract work. So, I don't know if you want to...
Well,
What do you call it? Unplanned works.
It's generally unplanned, so
Yeah.
Hamish he knows he's going to get some every year, so he makes a provision, but typically what happens, a lot of people come to him throughout the year from across the whole of council.
Saying this needs sorting.
Can you help us do this?
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
and I guess, like, the contract we have is only with the asset management group, so a lot of this work is from, like, Ian's team, etc., from other parts of the council, which we don't actually have a fixed contract with. It's work that sort of gets off, put to us throughout the year, so.
Taku
Thank you.
Tamaka.
It was actually answered by the
Oh.
response to Councillor Williams.
Oh.
It was about the pink thing,
Oh,
why you had suggestions which were a positive amongst a whole bunch of negatives.
Oh, I see.
Didn't kind of stack up, but yeah, we've got that.
Councillor Voss.
How is the excess, the 1.3 excess over budget treated?
Okay, so
So next year's budget, does that just roll in and you need to be
you're
not
talking about
funded by?
the end of year surplus?
Yeah,
Yeah, so end of year surplus is put back to council, so basically spread amongst the schemes, and then there's a dividend that's paid back to council effectively. So we retain some earnings for expenses throughout the year, and but generally it's spread through the.
So Works Group doesn't really hold any profit or excess cash. It's a very small amount for sort of incidentals and things that crop up. For the planned contract, any over-recovery is turned back to the schemes that they were over-recovered from. So Hamish works to make a small profit, so we don't end up, in it with a negative balance. So cover the costs, and it's generally a few percent over. So that few percent returns to each of the targeted schemes. Then for the private and uncommitted work, that goes into, I guess there's in the overall council budget, there's a return to council. So there's what's the term? A return, a dividend back to council. There's a bonus scheme with the staff, so that funds the staff bonus, and then that's pretty much
but
it.
at the end of the day, so, because you said you budget conservatively, great results and all those things already, and that's cool. But does that mean then that the budgets in the long-term plan are conservative as far as the revenue side of this is concerned? Because you've just had an example where you've had to excess about 1.2 or 3 mil, regardless of how it's distributed. So doesn't that mean therefore that the budget itself is, so that raises positive questions around the budget constraints that we may think we're under or we are under, simply because one part of the operation is performing very well. Yeah?
Yes, and I,
That hidden from the Finance Audit and Risk Committee, or else they'll have designs of...
Red flag.
I think in constructing our accounts for the long-term plan, it is worth a conversation about whether our assumptions are overly conservative on this revenue.
Yeah, well, you've got a line in there on BAU, worst case, best case scenarios, just as long as it's in there somewhere.
Yep.
And identify them, and that's absolutely fine. But everything's tight, and suddenly there's a bit of excess cash floating around in the great beast. So someone will grab it.
Yeah.
Councillor Van Dyke.
Yeah, just on the Marakaka access, we've heard of a couple of community groups this morning. There's another group there that's very actually active and really appreciative of the work that council has done in that area, and they make that very clear, and they are going to do some really great work in the old access, so it's really good.
Oh,
Thank
right,
you.
that's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Fantastic. Any other questions? Can I please have a mover to receive the report? Councillor Graham, and seconded Councillor Barker. Would you like to speak, Councillor Graham?
I would, Hamish. I really enjoy your reports. Thanks very much. And we really appreciate, I think everyone around this table appreciates the work that you guys do out there. Absolutely fantastic. And you're a treasure in our group. And Chris, a lot of that goes to you too. You know, we have these incredible people out there that do specialist work, which we would never want a private contractor to do. So
That's right.
you're a really great team. Thanks.
You.
Councillor Barker.
Again, just echo, I've listened to a number of your reports, Hamish. I've enjoyed each one of them. It's great. We all like to see practical things done by practical blokes and practical people, so it's great to see, and you're sort of the working cutting edge of the council. The other stuff that staff do is theoretical on papers and so on, incredibly valuable, but just doesn't have quite the same impact as you people do with your big toys going out there and bashing and crashing and smashing things. It's great to see.
Yeah, I know, good.
Yeah, James doesn't have a John Deere.
Fantastic. I think everyone enjoyed your video the most. So if I put it to the floor that we receive the Works Group annual report, all say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. All right. See you later.
So, and I invite the Enviroschools team up. Thank you for waiting. Get that, we're back on schedule, I think.
Doing well, Chair. Having
I think we might have a pink.
Pink.
I did want sound, so hopefully
Some
the
ideas
sound
on how
will
to
work.
improve.
Okay. Kia ora koutou everybody, it's lovely to be here. I'm Sally Chandler, for those who I haven't met, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Regional Council, and also coordinate the Enviroschools program here in Hawke's Bay. With me is my colleague Sonia Sedgwick, and Sonia is our Hastings Napier Schools Enviroschools facilitator, and yeah, so she might be able to share some information if we have any questions going through. So we have a report that you've all received, just to give you a bit of an update on where Enviroschools currently sits in our region, and how it links in with regional council processes. The Enviroschools programs, for those who don't know, is something that schools can sign up to, and it gives them an opportunity to put a sustainability lens across their programs and practices and processes. As I've said in the report, we've now got 66 Enviroschools here in Hawke's Bay, from Te Mahia right down to Sherwood School in central Hawke's Bay. So that's about 50-50 early childhood centres and schools, primary and intermediate. We have 3 part-time facilitators, who Sonia is one of them, and we have Jenny in Wairoa and Amy down in central Hawke's Bay. I don't need to go right through this report, but just to let you know that we believe that the work that we do is a good strategic fit for the Regional Council. We are always raising awareness with our schools and our teachers about what the Regional Council does, not just from an Enviroschools perspective, but that bigger, wider environmental impact and the work that the Regional Council is here to do. So that's something that we try to focus on or answer questions when they come along. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone has any particular questions. One of the reasons for being here today is just to highlight a video that we've recently had created, and it's a way of leading into opportunities for growth for the program here in Hawke's Bay. We haven't been particularly proactive because we've been constrained by capacity to facilitate the program, and we're hoping to lift our profile over the next few years, and we thought we would create this video as a way of sort of leading into that project. So I can play that for you now. Not.
So it's a Stella issue again.
Here we go.
I don't think
We're missing the Jaffas.
Enviroschools is a program to support teachers, to help students to think really hard about how to be more sustainable in terms of the natural environment, and it's hands-on.
Well, I feel really proud because I've been planting since I was like 4. So it was really cool because you've planted those trees and watched them grow, and after that you can kind of take the experience home with you, and we do lots of planting at home too.
It's a real way for children to learn through their environment. So they're learning new skills, they're learning problem solving, they're learning how to get on with each other, and it's all in a real environment. And I think it's really important for them to start understanding that from very young they can make a difference.
We feed the chickens when we have a job, and one of them is feeding the chickens and clearing out their water with a scrubbing brush.
We just found it highly valuable for our children to understand more about their natural world and to be able to take part and contribute towards positive change. So for us, that's what it meant for us as parents. But our children ultimately know that they're going to become the carers, the kaitiaki of our natural environment as they grow older, and they need to play a part in what that looks like and how the change is made.
I've seen kids become so enthusiastic and so actively involved in doing things in school environments that it really makes my heart sing.
It makes us feel good because the next generation, which is our kids and stuff, they'll know that some of the things we did to help the environment were there.
Most of those presenters were great, weren't they?
Enviroschools is a program to support teachers, to help students to think really hard.
Didn't want to start and I didn't want to finish.
Anyway, I didn't want it to finish.
Yeah. Is that your presentation, Sally?
Yeah,
Can we
pretty
have
much.
question time?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's open it up. Yes.
So how much do we put in? You've got 60
That's what I was
schools.
going to ask.
How much does it cost? Do we need to put in for each school?
Oh, I haven't actually got a breakdown of that.
So what's the total number? We divide it by 60.
Oh, I haven't got that number either. So our budget is about 150,000 at present.
That-
Yeah, so that covers my wages.
Is that
and-
mostly us, or is that mostly regional council?
Correct. We have funding, actually no, it's more than that, it's about 230. We do get some funding from Napier City Council and from Central Hawke's Bay District Council. So they do give us some funding. So 15,000 from Napier and 10,000 from Central Hawke's Bay.
You've just recently spent time with the CHB.
Yeah, so
Council with Amy too and presented there.
so they've just had a similar update to this. So they know where we're at.
Any other questions? No.
That was my question too.
Was it? So moving forward, Sally, what what would you ideally like this program to look like, say, in the next 3, 5, 10 years?
So obviously with a greater capacity to reach more community groups and school groups, we could certainly look at working with cross-council as well, look at working with teachers, developing local curriculum, which we've just started with our partnership with Te Mata Park, writing curriculum to be used in that space by schools. So that's just having its pilot at present, which Sonia's been working on. And it would be good to get more of a youth voice, especially in that climate change, climate action area. So we are planning a secondary school climate camp next year for a couple of days. So I think it's a great opportunity to capture this energy of these kids to support what we do.
Fantastic. Thank
There
you
is
so
a
much.
proposal coming through the long-term plan process to increase resourcing, which is obviously something available to council. Have you still got a waiting list of schools, or is that now?
No, we're up to date.
We're up to date?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
that's good.
Yes.
Well, we've had some expressions of interest this year in schools that we met with, and quite a bit around the secondary area also. But with COVID sort of halting things, we haven't reconnected in, or they've just slowed down their process of deciding to be part of the program. But we regularly have schools interested. But the secondary has been an area we would like to see more growth in. So I do 20 schools. It's quite a big portfolio, and moving into that secondary area would be another extension of that. So there's definitely big areas where we could grow, and there's certainly more teachers interested than there ever have been before.
Councillor Voss.
Could you just explain a bit further how the relationship with Te Mata Park Trust differs from what you've done previously? How have you shaped that up to kind of ensure?
So they approached us. They've got a new communications and education manager there, Sarah Shaw, and she's a teacher, has a teaching background, and the trustees of the park wanted to see more engagement with people in the park, and she saw it as a great opportunity to bring on some Enviroschools resources and activities and knowledge. Yeah, so we're helping them develop those.
Kind of
We actually met with her initially in this very room. Green Drinks was hosted here by the Regional Council earlier in the year, and Sarah met us because we spoke to the room about Enviroschools, and she really liked what we had to say. And she's relatively new to living in New Zealand, and has got this education background but doesn't have a lot of local knowledge and understanding. Very passionate, but it was part of what they wanted as a park is to develop educational sessions for students there, and so she approached Enviroschools and ultimately the Regional Council to help deliver and set up educational walks in there, which will be interactive. If you're not even there with us, they will have areas with further educational knowledge than there ever has been in the past. So it's growing quite a lot with multiple partnerships.
Yeah, great.
It's a good relationship.
Yes, it's
I'll
really
move.
exciting.
Fantastic. Well, we have a mover and we have a seconder. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I would. Thank you, Sally, and your team. Sorry, I forgot your name. But
Sonia.
Sonia, thanks, Sonia. I think this is just an incredibly amazing thing you guys do, and I've had the privilege to visit a few of the schools and had them around at my place as well, because you're growing people. You know, we spend a lot of time growing trees and fixing rivers, but you are growing people to be the right kind of people for the future and not make the mistakes that my generation have made. And if we'd have had this, perhaps the world would be a different place.
Okay.
Thanks very much. I've seen the program in action for many years, and it kind of seems to follow a few waves.
It does.
But I really like this model that you're looking at, for example, with Te Mata Trust, just to leverage up the closed loops. Really neat to see it in action, so yeah, good luck to you on that one.
Thank you. And it's going across multiple platforms now too, because the park regularly posts on their social media and puts it on their website, and it promotes Enviroschools and what the Regional Council's doing with work up there. So there's so much more happening in that space around strengthening community and consultation and communication. It's a really feel-good factor that's starting to link in very strongly. It's a great place, the Te Mata Park, to showcase these things.
Fantastic, and I think I'd like to endorse what's been said as well, just that we're looking forward to the future of Enviroschools and that path that it's going to take. So I'll just put it to the floor that we receive the Enviroschools update report. Those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Kia ora. Thank you.
Hopefully we were shortest and sweetest ones today.
Definitely the sweetest, yes. Thank you. Our next presentation, item 10, Hawke's Bay Biosecurity and Biodiversity, section 17A review. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. I'll just invite Kevin Collins to come up to the front and introduce Kevin. Kevin's details are laid out in the paper, but he's been working with me over the past few months to pull together this review and subsequent report. He's going to shortly run you through the detail of that and then is available to answer questions about it. A couple of comments from me just for context really. One is, look, we accept all of the findings of the review in full, and we're in the process of working our way through responses to those. Today sets out for you at a high level what those findings are. It gives you an indication of what we are thinking about in terms of response. Today's report and today's discussion doesn't give you the detail of that, but that will come to you through the development of the long-term plan, because there are changes that we are proposing to bring to the way we deliver parts of our biosecurity and biodiversity program, including additional resources and in some cases complete changes to the programs. And we want to engage you in a more detailed conversation about those as we work into the long-term plan. So bear with us in terms of the detail that will come in those responses in time. I guess for me, I'd just signal that probably one of the most chunky pieces of that discussion will be the way we manage our possum control areas in the future. We think that there are some fundamental parts to that we need to change with some urgency. And the other chunky part will be the way we deliver our plant pest management. But again, you'll get all that detail subsequently. And finally, I'll just acknowledge the staff and the Biosecurity Biodiversity team who have joined us for this presentation. I think you've heard today from a number of presenters about the value they are bringing to our work with the community, and they are all highly competent and very passionate people in the fields, and they're very interested in seeing how we can improve our game in this area. So just welcome all of those folk to the conversation as well. But look, I'll hand it over to Kevin. I think Kevin's happy to take questions during the presentation and we'll just roll into it. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. I'll just make sure that I know how to drive this. Yes, I do. All right. Yes, I am Kevin Collins. I'm the author of the report that we're discussing today, and my sort of most immediate background is working with Waikato Regional Council, managing some of their biodiversity and biosecurity programs for a number of years. Now I'm a private consultant working on similar issues. I'm based in Hamilton. The way we conducted this review was 3 very similar online surveys looking at different parts of the biosecurity system, staff, contractors, and community. And I'll say a few words about what community entailed in that context. And then we did a 4th survey of other regional councils so that we could benchmark Hawke's Bay's program against other councils, which is not an easy task, and I'll tell you more about that. So today my focus is mostly on the staff and the community and the benchmarking aspect of things, and as Ian said, I'm happy to take questions as I go, so just flag it for me if that's what you'd like to do. The overall results, reasonably straightforward, a sense that the programs are not operating as effectively as they might. That is a theme that comes across through all three of the surveys. Resourcing is below similar councils. We'll talk more about how to make those comparisons, but definitely that's a theme. I guess on the kind of good news side, people feel that the goals that you have all set through the Regional Pest Management Plan are quite realistic and reasonable, but the issues are around delivering that in an effective way through the resourcing that's available. There were some references to operational changes, things that could be reviewed. Possum control is certainly one of them. I want to emphasize, and that's the bottom point there, I didn't get a lot of negative pushback from people, not a lot of sense that this is a sort of fatally broken program. That's not it at all. What I did get was a sense that things have slipped a little bit over the last couple of years, and that they should be addressed before they slip more. And that was a sense that came through all three of those sectors. So now looking more specifically at the staff survey, similar themes. They're feeling like their effectiveness and their ability to deliver is undermined or weakened by inadequate budgets and just basically being overstretched. Particularly true for some of the programs that Ian mentioned: possum control, Chilean needlegrass, rabbits, and the biodiversity program as a whole. In the comments that were made in the survey, staff certainly recognized that the budgets have grown over time, but so have community expectations, so have government directives, and the scope of the problem has increased as well in a number of places. There's this theme coming through, and you'll see it in subsequent slides. There's a theme coming through about a need for better surveillance, better monitoring, and basically more data about what's happening out there in the environment so that people can make better operational decisions. The quote across the top is a quote from one of the comments from staff, and it really summarizes people just feeling stretched too thin. So the 2 bullet points there speak for themselves. Only 4 of the 17 respondents said their team had enough resources to do what they were asked to do. And similarly, 13 of 17 felt their team did not have enough people to deliver what they were asked to do. There's a quote, sums it up. People feeling like, they're not being asked to do unreasonable things, but they are feeling like the resourcing doesn't line up. Takeaway message in terms of biosecurity programs was that those programs are effective from the staff's view, and that they are being undermined again by the lack of resources. So people feeling good, but feeling a little bit nervous about not being able to deliver, and that's what that last quote there says. Done well, limited staff, programs have gotten bigger, gaps are starting to appear, people are starting to feel a little bit nervous about delivery. I put this slide in specifically because it was one of the areas where the strongest comments came from staff. They were really adamant about this program, feeling like they don't have enough people, particularly during the busy season, don't have enough budget. It's a difficult weed to control. There's some real challenges there with it, and they feel a real risk of failing to meet the objectives that have been set for them. You can see the quote there that sums it up. Just not going to be able to do our best. Last 2 seasons have been difficult enough. The conclusions that I drew from this were reasonably obvious. More staff during the busy summer season. Have a look at the program about are there more effective and efficient ways to deliver it. Have a look at the surveillance. Now, this is not an issue that's just a Hawke's Bay issue, but the ability to confidently say that we know where these pests are and we were on top of them, and if we think they're gone, are they really gone? That's the proof of absence concept. That's important, and it lacks in a lot of places. I'm not an expert in Chilean needlegrass. I am aware that in the past there was an effort to have this in a national pest management plan, and that didn't succeed. I guess my professional view is that this is a pest that is early on the infestation curve, and a national response would be an effective way to get on top of it. That's something that you might consider pushing for through the regional council collectives. Biodiversity as a whole, staff felt that they were pleased that a start had been made in this area, but really still not doing enough, and that was an overwhelming 80% response. You can see some of the quotes there. The one that I've highlighted really also sums up my view, is that in terms of having an impact out there at a regional scale, you probably will need to throw some more resources at it and to maybe have a thought about how it's delivered. The theme across the staff and the community and the contractors was that in terms of having the impact that you want to have in biodiversity, you're not quite there for biodiversity. So now I'm switching to community results, and I'm just going to take a short sip. So this was not wide community consultation. We have a sample size of 16, which is reasonably small, but it did cover a wide range of sectors and groups, dominated by farming interests across all the spectrum of farming, but also DOC and Osprey, QE2 Trust, we had Maori Trust, we had some forestry in there, and recreation. So you can take it that there's a reasonably broad range of views reflected in here. And that's good, because half of those respondents said that the pest management plan usually or always meets the needs of their organization. So that's pretty encouraging. On the flip side of that, there were a number of comments where dissatisfaction was voiced with some pest control programs, particularly possums. That came through reasonably strongly. You can see the quote there. Everybody knows that TB has focused people's minds on this issue. There's a sense that as areas go back off of TB control, becomes a landowner responsibility, maybe things start to slip there. Everybody wants possums controlled, but not always the highest priority on a day-to-day basis for farmers and other people. And so people feel that there's a little bit of opportunity for slippage there. There's a surveillance theme coming through here, people feeling that the surveillance is a bit inadequate and that we're not as sure as we should be in terms of what's really happening to possum numbers out there. So we asked this question about efficiency. We structured it the same way across all the surveys, and the scale was 0 to 100, 100 being very efficient, 0 being pretty appalling, really. The score here was 49, so not a tremendously high score for possums from the community. The staff score was 64. We're looking at the program from the inside, so a bit of a disconnect there that probably is worth exploring. All of that boils down to what Ian said, which is that a review of that PCA model and the delivery is probably worth doing, and I know that's underway. Looking at a couple of other programs, the rabbit program scored very low from the community respondents, 20 out of 100. That's quite a low score, and the comments, which are quite rich, reflected very significant concern that the rabbit population is growing. People are not feeling like we're on top of it. The biodiversity responses reflected pretty much the staff view, which was that people are pleased to see more being done in this space, and unfortunately they also want more done, even more done. That last quote there summed it up pretty nicely. Again, there's that sense of not having the impact that you want to have because we're not putting enough effort into it or into the right places. This comes up a number of times. I will repeat it once more here. All three groups want a better ability to measure progress toward outcomes. And that, of course, means understanding what's happening out there in the environment, whether it's with pests or whether it's with the species that we're trying to protect. Certainly not just a Hawke's Bay issue. It's a national issue. I just put there as an example that the new Wilding Pines conifer control program, putting lots of money toward that nationally, and there's no national surveillance program there either. Hawke's Bay, through your team, has been pretty good about pushing for research into how can we have better surveillance programs, how can we have better monitoring, and I certainly think that's worth doing more of. The staff is also, I know, pushing for some standardized biodiversity monitoring across councils and coordinated with DOC. That's really, really needed and is really absent. So in terms of biodiversity at a regional scale, a lot of councils are flying pretty blindly. I'm shifting to the benchmarking. So this is looking at other councils. And I will say here that it's very hard to do an apples-to-apples comparison. Part of that is because councils structure their budgets very differently. So what's in your pot is not in their pot necessarily. And of course, councils are very different. They have different rating bases. They have different geography, different communities, et cetera. So just as an example, Hawke's Bay reports its biosecurity budgets, and it includes predator-free Hawke's Bay, which is a chunk of money and resources in there, both money and people. That complicates the analysis because other councils don't have that same structure. So what I did was I tried to find some things that were comparable, and I looked primarily at councils that had similar total expenditure budgets and some total areas that were roughly similar. And so using that as a comparison, you can see there, and you'll see more in just a subsequent slide, your total expenditure is somewhere around 56 million, 6.3% of that going to biosecurity, depending a little bit on how you calculate it. And the average for comparative councils, so I've taken out the outliers there, but for comparative councils, the average is about double. It's about 11% going to biosecurity. Hawke's Bay spending per hectare is also last among your North Island neighbors. The conclusion in the bold there is that your budgets are below most of your peers. This is simply that in chart form. You can see Hawke's Bay in the middle there. So the reported budget for biosecurity is 3.6 million. That goes down by $1 million if you factor out predator-free. And so you can see the percentages on the right-hand side. The councils above on the top part of the chart, Northland's spending about 50 million total budget and about 15% towards biosecurity. Down at the other end, you've got Horizons with a slightly larger budget of about 62 million, and they're doing about 10%. You can see there that the number looks slightly better or worse for Hawke's Bay if you include or exclude predator-free. Dig down a little bit and looking at pest animals. This is also hard to compare, unfortunately, because, for example, for some councils, staff are not differentiated in that way. Staff do just biosecurity and they don't split out between pests, between plants or animals. Pest animal budget here is about 1.5 million. That excludes predator-free. I took that number out. That's a little bit below the council average. You are noticeably lower in staff, so 3 versus the council average of 7. Just to give you a sense of the scale in terms of your neighbors, Bay of Plenty reported 3 animal pest staff. Horizons reported 16. Some of you will know that Bay of Plenty doesn't have possums as an official pest in their pest management strand. Just another word about possums. The budget here is about half of the council average and less than all but one of your local neighbors. There's also a low monitoring rate in terms of how often you get back to a property to monitor, lower than other councils, only about 10%. And that's a clear risk factor because it's hard to know exactly what's happening out there to possum numbers. The story for pest plants is a little bit clearer and a little bit easier to illustrate. A budget of about $1 million here, council average of 1.6 million across 8 responses. Among your neighbors, Waikato is high at 3.3 million. Again, a noticeable difference in staff, 4.5 FTEs here and about 8 for the council average. So it's a theme that reoccurs. And it reoccurs here again for the biodiversity program. The budget here is well below many other councils. The average for councils is about 2.5% of total operating budget, and you are at about 1.2, so roughly half. And a fairly big difference in actual dollars. So North Island neighbors, you're averaging about 2.5 million spent on biodiversity. Here you can see it's about 718. And also significantly fewer staff, 1.5 to 5 for the average. The things in bold won't be news to you. There is a national policy statement coming, probably, and there is a new national biodiversity strategy. Those are going to raise expectations even higher, and those will have resourcing implications for you. The need for some nationally consistent biodiversity monitoring is quite strong, and I credit Hawke's Bay with commissioning some important research in this area. In terms of doing this kind of analysis and understanding where you are, particularly in relation to other councils, some changes to your budgeting procedures would make for greater transparency and accountability if you split out biodiversity so that people could see it from biosecurity, separate from biosecurity. That is the last thing. I do want to say thank you to the staff. A lot of them are here. They took a lot of time to speak with me. Many of them after working hours took a lot of time to speak with me. And can I say that their commitment and their passion to this is really very clear. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Before we have questions, I just want to thank you, Kevin, for a fantastic presentation. There's some, I suppose, real interesting and stark benchmarking points in there.
Thank you.
And also I'd like to endorse our staff for doing this mahi and being on board with this. So I will open up for questions. 1, 2, yep. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for that slightly troubling but very helpfully, helpful report. The question I've got, this is a cost effectiveness review, so it's not just a cost review, it's a cost effectiveness review, I guess, utility to which we put our money. How much of this do you think is we don't spend enough versus if we did things in different ways structurally or in terms of objectives and methods, we'd get better outcomes for our dollar spend?
I think it varies depending on which program you look at.
Take possums, for example.
Take possums. I think that you need to take a close look at the delivery mechanism there. And that's based partly on my professional experiences and partly on the comments that I heard coming back through the survey. So, for example, the landowner responsibility model has some attractive components to it. It does mean that possum control is not necessarily the top priority at the right time for landowners. Things tend to kind of get overlooked. I do that myself on my own block, and I've got a much smaller block and a much less complicated farming business than a lot of people. So in that case, I think a look at the delivery mechanism is warranted.
And the over-reliance on landowner management is part of the problem there that you're saying?
I think, again, I'm not trying to dodge the question, it depends a lot on the individual landowner. Well, it depends almost entirely on the individual landowner. Somebody who's switched on and does it properly and at the right time, consistently year after year, then you won't have a problem. But not everybody does that, and because of a monitoring program that's probably not as rigorous as it could be, you're not sure where the weak spots are. And also, you have to monitor quite a number of individual properties, to find out who's doing what.
Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
My question is aimed at James. Could you please give the council the benefit of your thoughts on this report? Because when I read it, some of the statistics I thought was some Churchill liars, damn liars, and statistics. The measures are pretty harsh. So, what do you think of the report?
Worrying at one level, although the conversation that Ian and I had yesterday was along the lines that we've probably caught the situation just in time. So it's not an irredeemable situation, but it's clear that we need to put more resourcing into the biosecurity program overall, and do some work around the delivery model to ensure that it's most effective. We've had a series of, policy settings which we've been running with for quite some time. Council of the Day made some judgment calls about whether that was sufficient and whether that would get the outcomes. And I think we're seeing all the signs that it's not delivering on the expectations that were held at that point in time, both for financial reasons but also in terms of the model. And I also think that there's an inherent human nature element of this. Of course, as landowners have seen the success, particularly of the possum suppression work done historically, people have got complacent. They may have historically got similarly inclined towards rabbits, and look, it may well be that in the plant pest space, people tend not to think about it being a problem until it is a problem on their property, and so don't think about the wider community effort that they need to be part of in terms of surveillance and cooperation. So I think when you candidly think about the incentives on people who are running busy businesses, they're focused on their immediate operation, what's right in front of them in terms of their farming operation in particular, it's perhaps understandable that the place we've found ourselves in would inevitably arrive there. So, I think the report couldn't have come too soon. It's great that Kevin's done his work, and I think it's good that we've had an independent view, some benchmarking across the country. So I think it puts Council now in a strong position to make some funding decisions in relation to the long-term plan, and for the management team to make some decisions in terms of the delivery model. So this is the start now of some fairly urgent and fairly substantial work.
Councillor Curtin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you for your report, Mr. Collins. I just want to explore the report itself is significantly troubling at its face, and therefore invites the questions that we've got. The thing that I'm interested to know, because it's a survey, staff survey based at one level, plus some financials where you've benchmarked. It then begs a question, just having gone through similar budgets with multiple departments myself, you always get a clamour from staff to more resources, please. So we need to discount that, and then also to explore the previous programs that have operated. So the report itself, or your investigation, was not looking back historically at what we had done. For example, if we'd operated superbly for a decade prior to this survey, we may not need to have had the investment that others have. So we need to discount that as a possibility as well. So really, my question is, what next step should be taken to, if you like, reality test your conclusions and determine that, in fact, what you're saying or the conclusions are real in terms of the prevalence of pests on the ground out there? Have you got any comment on what next to validate, substantial more investment in this area?
Yep, I have two comments. The first is about what's real and what's not real. What I'll say is that the themes, particularly around possums, were consistent across staff, contractors, and community. So it wasn't simply just a staff view, and that struck me because I thought that you might hear different things, but you didn't. In terms of next steps, the Possum Control Review Assessment, which is basically a deeper dive into that program. And that deeper dive involves a much closer look at what is the monitoring system, what is the confidence level that we have in understanding what the situation is out there. Talking to some additional groups, or if not additional groups, then in more detail. So for example, tomorrow I'm meeting with a number of contractors, getting their views on how this might be delivered in a different way. And of course they will have a worldview, right? Like people have a worldview, they'll have a worldview, and you'll take that with a grain of salt if you need to, but it's important to understand what they think the options might be. I also think we should talk to landowners. I was personally surprised by the comments that came back from this survey from landowners, primarily from farmers, who were open to a review of how things might be done differently. And so I want to dig more deeply at that, and that's what I would say.
Thank you. If I could just follow up, essentially a question for staff and James is, how come we didn't know this, and how come our systems haven't thrown up this issue up until this report? It's essentially a question for the chairman of the FARS committee is how is this happening? What do you know about this, and if not, why
all
not?
His fault.
You're on.
It's all his fault.
Ian?
So, look, this is the first time, and I think Campbell can correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time that we've gone in and done a review of the biosecurity functions. That would be point number one. So we've got established monitoring programs that have met and recognised, if you like, industry best practice to date. The Possum Control Area program, when set up, was state of the art and was nationally recognised. We were right at the pointy end of those sorts of programs. So I inherited this portfolio a little over 2 years ago, and in that intervening 2-year period, there have been enough indicators to say, actually, this is an area of our business that we need to go and have a more detailed look at. So that's what we've done. And not surprisingly, it's discovered that actually some of the programs that we've had running and have been relatively static, both in terms of funding and approach, need review and modernising potentially. That doesn't surprise me. So nothing in this review has surprised me. It's all been intuitively, it made sense after some time working with the team, looking at what we're doing and looking at our budgets. It's lined up. The other point I'd make is just back to the earlier question about where to from here, I think, effectively, is, as I'd said at the start, this gives us kind of that initial high-level broad reach across quite a complicated and complex bit of our work. It's indicated the areas that we actually think, oh, okay, there are some risks here. Possum Control Area is a good one. The next step is to deep dive into those and look at, well, where did we come from? What have we done? What's changed? Why? What would we do in the future? What does the risk profile look like? What's an acceptable level of risk? And I just want to make it really clear to you that in doing that, we're going to bring that back to you, because you're going to need to trade off cost against risk, against the politics, particularly in possums, because the approach that we're starting to lean towards in terms of staff is to regain possum management on farm. So we'll run a contracting program on behalf of landowners to ensure that it's done effectively, efficiently, and with the right impact. But there'll be costs, there'll be a lot of politics, and ultimately it's about managing risk. And those are questions and decisions that you as governors will need to make. But we'll bring all of that back to you in the detail you need to make those decisions.
Thank you. Councillor Foss.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Can I just make one other observation, and that is that our focus in the last long-term plan was very much in the biodiversity space, and I think we should acknowledge that, that the Council has made significant progress, nationally leading in some areas, around biodiversity and with our predator-free programs. So we've had a focus, and that was, as I say, the focus of the last long-term plan. Our more BAU biosecurity functions did not get significant attention in the last long-term plan, and like all things, I guess, over a period, things start to get a bit creaky. So we do have this opportunity now in this long-term plan to address some of that, although some of this is going to flow into the next few years. And that goes to the sorts of trade-off questions that Ian was referring to before.
Thank you. Councillor Foss.
Thanks very much. Well, first of all, colleagues, this shows the benefits of these Section 17A reports and this process for this report, and it's a very, very serious report and quite an indictment, but it's huge merit in having the staff engagement and, albeit a small cluster, a sample of community involvement you had there. It's very, very powerful, and particularly the way in which those that are actually at the coalface trying to execute and deliver policy decisions of the council are having to deal with. And to me, it points to a huge disconnect along the way between those that are trying to carry out instruction from council down and them on the ground trying to fit more into a 8-hour day than that's humanly possible, and the results speak to that. About a year ago, I arrived at this table and was asked quite a number of questions in and around pest management, possums in particular, and I had many, many, many reports of that are reflected in pretty much the comments you have there, and in fact personal experience of all of the above. And at various committees, myself and some colleagues were asked for various monitoring reports, just counts, benchmarks, etc. And again, so that disconnect has been reflected here. Now, this is not about what I'm saying here is not about apportioning blame because we can't do it. And CEO, I think you're absolutely right. I'm sorry, it might have been you, Ian. This has arrived just in time. I think you just caught it at the edge of the cliff here, because we are judged, the public judge us on the things they can see and touch. As silly as it might sound, it's possums, it's rabbits, it's water, it's trees. And so this report tells me that we as a council, we all take responsibility here. To put it politely, really need to up our game, which has been alluded to, and draw the line. And yes, there's more to come insofar as internal monitoring of possums or the possum control areas, that system. Looking forward to that report, and hopefully by that stage we've turned the page here on the results of this report here. Again, jokes aside, possums is probably the only place where farmers and environmentalists land on the same page. There's an economic impact, there's an environmental impact, you name it. And I could go on quite a way, but from central Hawke's Bay to Waimarama, where I live, to out to Maraitotra, to up where we've had the TB outbreak, I've had people talking to me about these issues for a long time. And I'm very grateful that it's come to this considered level, and I'm look forward to working with the team to put it right, to lift our game. I genuinely do. I'm not about apportioning blame or anything. It's just, well, let's get on with the job. I do have a question though, because I think
I was just about to get in there. Question, Councillor. Councillor, do we have a question?
My possum therapy. I have been waiting for this moment.
Your hobby horse.
I let the rope go, Councillor.
It's in the fridge, actually. Is it just financial resources and FTEs? We're under-resourced, or with the caveats that you supplied, etc. That's fine. But this has gone on for a while, and those budgets have been signed off for a while, under-resourcing the ambitions, and we make announcements such as predator-free without actually doing some real hard yards to go progression and how we're going to get there, etc. Is there other elements, cultural elements, internal, well, that might have been beyond your report actually, but things that you may have picked up, particularly with your staff engagement, that we can observe to try and improve the situation so there's fluid ownership of this resource and the solution from this table down and from those that are on the ground up?
I can't answer that. I can't answer that in the level that you want, in the detail that you want now, because that detailed analysis hasn't been done. I can tell you that there are things to look at, like the relationship between the council and Osprey. And the degree to which council wants to take responsibility for TB-free responsibilities versus biodiversity responsibilities. You need to look at those things and consider them, and those will have impacts, and I didn't do that in this report.
And you weren't probably asked to either, I appreciate it, but actually Osprey, So we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Okay, so we have a mover of the report and a seconder. Would you like to speak?
Just very briefly, look, a very sobering report, and thanks for the efforts you put in. Thanks to the staff for their efforts as well. Clearly this has got substantial financial implications. I'm seeing sort of the $500,000 to $1 million resurrection needed to get us out of a bit of a bind. So I'm looking forward to the LTP discussions around it, but it's looking like that magnitude of investment to turn things around. I'm interested in those next steps. For example, the Chief Executive has put his hand up to biodiversity investments we've made, and yet the figures you've produced are saying that we are behind in other areas. So both in biodiversity and biosecurity, it looks like we've got problems and need to address those. The other concerning thing is that our risk management framework hasn't picked this up sooner. I think we can forgive COVID-type events as something that one would not put into a risk management profile, but I think it is, we cannot make the same claim when our core piece of business around biodiversity and biosecurity ought to be immediately identifiable as areas of risk. And we didn't do that. So I think Craig and I have got a bit more work to do in terms of that structure and coming up with a more robust mechanism than we currently have to identify the risks and do something about it. Councillor
Barker.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed reading the report. I was a bit challenged on occasions by the numbers you used, because if you just compare, for example, just compare what we spend with other councils as a percentage, you didn't describe what the rest of the budget was. I mean, we might have had huge expenses on other areas and been disproportionately about that. So there's, to me, a lot more analysis needs to be done about it. But the warning flag was there. The second thing was that you did compare how much we did per hectare, per this, per that, the other, which was helpful. And on all of those things, we were a little bit behind the game. I accept that. And as dismal as your report was, I thought on the other side of it, there are actually some really good signs. I mean, Bluff Hill has reduced its possum numbers dramatically, simply because of the activities of the local residents. And the biodiversity is improving. And so those community things I didn't see in that side of the report. I know there's a lot of other good things which are going on. So I would like to leaven your report with a few other aspects of looking at this. But to take the nub of it, it is a warning to the council. We need to do better. I would think for myself that we should have a group within the Environment Committee to have a joint investigation of this, because I think it's very hard to compare what is being done here with what's being done in neighbouring councils on just with paper. I don't want to do it myself, others might want to, but I think it's a little bit like a fact-finding tool to see exactly what is being done, get a feel for yourself as to how the effectiveness of the dollar is spent, because it's not always well spent. Some areas spend better than others, so it's about the quality of the money, the quality of the staff, the quality of the plan. So you need to have a feel for those things before we can come back and look at what will work better for us. The other aspect of it is what other areas do will work well for them, but might not be transportable here. So we've got to have, I think, a measured response to this, but to accept something significant needs to be done. And anybody can see that the possum, the rabbit numbers are out of control. We accept the possums have got out of control, and that was a breakdown of the relationship with Osprey. We're on to that. The last thing I'd say is I think we've also got to think not just in terms of what we spend in terms of staff doing it, but how we engage with our community. And I want to make a small confession here. I've seen this stuff about Chilean needlegrass, but I never knew quite what Chilean needlegrass was till someone pointed out to me. And I thought, well, if I didn't know exactly what it was, I know a lot of other things, like old man's beard and so on, but never got the Chilean needlegrass. A lot of other people. So I think we've got to try and find ways in which we can engage with our community to raise their awareness and then explain to them what they need to do to go and fix these things. Because I think we have missed out on that aspect as well. I don't think we've engaged with our community as well as we could do. But again, it seems to me to be a range of factors we need to undertake, as well as getting more budget and more staff. But those aren't the only two in my view.
Thank you, Councillor. Any last speakers? Very quickly.
Not necessarily last, but I do wish to speak. They are sobering numbers. But I just want to say this. I've been here for 6 years, and during that time, so it's not very long, during that period of 6 years, we practically wiped out possums. We practically wiped them out. And I was a lifestyle block, and it was one time I used to be able to shoot 7 possums. Went out and shot 7 in a night. And then none. It was quite disappointing because I used to quite like shooting them. But there were no possums. We practically wiped them out. Now, I don't know how long ago, maybe 3-4 years ago that happened. And then they've crept back, and I've got a couple that I'm going to get my friend Rick Barker out there. He reckons he can sharp eye, and we're going to knock them off. But they're creeping back. Now, we had an issue with Osprey. There was a total breakdown, and but maybe that's the reason, maybe it's not. Maybe they're just a persistent pest that creeps back. Rabbits. Well, there is a huge amount of rabbits out there, and I'm probably shooting 3 a week myself. and you know, it's hard. They're hard to get. That pindone doesn't work. It's like feeding them lollies. And when you and I get harangued in farmlands last week because we put out pindone and this lady's dog ate it and got sick and she had to take him to the vet. So, in many ways, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. And I don't know, you know, your stats. I just have to believe your stats. But we've spent a lot of time in that 6 years I've been here. We've set up the Biodiversity Trust, and it's incredibly unfair not to use those numbers, because that is part of our contribution.
Yeah.
And they're getting out and they're creating a fund and they're doing their thing. I think we have spent a lot of energy on biodiversity, maybe not enough. I'm quite surprised that other councils are spending more. I would recognise that Wellington would, but I've travelled through Taranaki and all those other places, and I've looked at their riparian plantings, and I'm not that impressed either. So, you know, you could do a stat and have a look at something else, and we might be doing, as Councillor Barker pointed out, a lot more. So we're going to take it on board. Your report is the report, the numbers are the numbers. I think about Henry Ford's comment, but I'm not going to make it now. And we just got to do better, but we've got to do better everywhere.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
So if we're going to get to lunch, we've got a mover and a seconder. So if we can, as a committee, receive the Hawke's Bay Biosecurity and Biodiversity Section 17A Effectiveness and Efficiency Review, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those against? Carried. Kia ora. Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. It is lunchtime. So back here at 1:30, please, because we have two people who need to go at 2, and we need to do that last item that we referred. Can you stay till 2?